Who I am. Thank you for the fantastic introduction, and thank you, Patrick and Nétive, for having me come out here to talk to you all today about something I'm very, very passionate about, which is the changing landscape of contingent workforce management. What does it mean going forward? So at Staffing Industry Analysts, we call ourselves a global advisor on the world of contingent work. We've been in business for about 23 years, focusing primarily on this space, contingent labor, and that's all we've ever done. For most of the time, we provided research and market strategic support to suppliers, HR companies, temporary or interim firms, MSP VMS firms, as it were. And then about 10 years ago, we built a research approach for buyers of this service. We are global. We have about 80% of the largest staffing firms, and we have over $100 billion in spend, is what we talk as part of our CBS Council, and that's primarily where I live. I'm responsible for all of our buyer content, all of the conferences that we do, all the research we produce, all the webinars we produce, which is all of these things that you see on the right-hand side. You might be familiar. We just had our event in London. We have our largest event for the buyers in Las Vegas in October. You're all welcome to come if you want to make that trip. But we also do similar sort of events for executives of staffing firms as well. So we feel we're in a unique position to give a really 360-degree perspective on what's happening in the marketplace. Because we talk both to buyers and suppliers at all levels of the company. Now, my job is to work primarily with these guys. These are the listing of companies that we have within the CBS Council. Some names you might recognize, some names you might not. They have spend under management, which is a measure that we use to gauge program complexity and breadth of anywhere from $12 billion down to several million dollars. So as you can imagine, there's a tremendous variance in sophistication that they all bring to bear. And really, after doing this for 6 years and working with these companies in detail about anything from program design, the contract negotiation, to internal adoption, really can identify that we are at an exciting time right now. And that's something I think is something I really want to impress upon all of you, is that right now, you are all at the front edge of a revolution in the way work gets done. And I think that if you think about things in the highest possible stakes, the people in this room are fundamentally changing the way that things are occurring in companies. We are redefining how our kids are going to be working through this evolution, this idea of contingent work. So it's a tidal wave of change. So what we're seeing is this evolution of the marketplace of the role of the contingent workforce manager, right? So one of the things that I always like to do is kind of start a little bit around the contingent workforce manager. How do you identify with the role of managing your contingent workforce? Are you the burly shark? Are you the caveman? Or are you just kind of out there in your ivory tower throwing edicts down from the sky? How many of you are actively managing a program or involved in contingent labor in your own companies? Are you managing something in a holistic manner? I imagine most of you in this room, right? So really the way the role is, and I've been in the seat myself for a number of years, it's really you're kind of a cheerleader and a gatekeeper, and most often you're somebody who gets a ball in your face. It's a tough job, but it's really an evolving one. And how companies are taking advantage of this is they're using tactical problems and strategic solutions. And the idea of contingent labor, something we talked a great deal about at dinner last night, is that it is a tactical problem being solved by a strategic solution. And so the real fundamental challenge that we have for the market as a whole right now is this change from the contingent workforce from being something that you just bring to bear to solve a tactical problem to create a strategic advantage for your company. And we're going to talk a little bit about how companies go about doing that. But before we get started, we just want to make sure we're talking about apples to apples and what are some of the things from a definition standpoint. So a VMS, what is a VMS? And what is an MSP? So often companies kind of confuse the two sort of things. VMS is simply an internet-based software that's used to manage your contingent workforce. There's different types of VMSs, and it's not just for contingent workforce. You might have a VMS to manage your postal services or to manage your mailroom. Managed service provider, a very old-standing concept in IT, but in the context of contingent workforce, it's an outsourced management of your contingent workforce program. And that could be either internal, meaning your own staff manage it or in a program office on top of a VMS, or you outsource it. These technologies are not to be confused with things like applicant tracking systems, which are resume tracking systems that companies use to manage full-time hires, or ERP, enterprise resource planning software. They often all go hand in hand. The history of VMS, it evolved in the 80s. One of the early adopters or early programs was a company called PeopleNet. Really was the first, at Ford Company, was the first true VMS. And to give you some idea of how relevant this is in the marketplace, Fieldglass recently was acquired by SAP for $1 billion. So it's big business. There's a lot of M&A occurring in that. In our landscape report, $90 billion of VMS spend under management in total in 2012 for our report there. Now that sounds like a big number, but when you think about the global landscape as $4 trillion in contingent labor is how we define it, still a lot of opportunity for these technologies to grow. When we think about how technology, the different flavors of VMS, you could have your own technology. Some companies, I think some companies in the room, even last night, build their own VMS, either with an MSP or without. Others have their own other technology, meaning they use their own corporate infrastructure, maybe FileMaker Pro, maybe an Excel spreadsheet even, and then no technology. Those are the sort of engagements. MSP models, the way we define the MSP structure is 4 separate models: master supplier, hybrid, vendor neutral, and internally managed. In the States, the predominant model is a vendor neutral model, where the MSP, let me see if we have it here. Vendor neutral, the MSP is responsible for managing the suppliers themselves. They're not competing for submitting requisitions and the like. More often what we see in Europe is the master supplier model, where the MSP or the entity is responsible for also fulfilling roles in addition to managing your sub-vendor space. Hybrid is really a combination of both. And then, of course, we have something like internally managed. The idea of global program management is based on the fundamental premise that the unifying concept, the unifying application, is going to be your technology. So maybe you have a VMS deployed across your enterprise, but you have different sort of management strategies on top of each of those for a unified hierarchy. So you might have an outsourced MSP for your plant environment, or maybe you have an internal MSP for your strategic hires. But this bifurcation of oversight is something that we certainly see as a best practice in the market, and something that is more happening more and more, in addition to things like managing it themselves. In the States, we're certainly seeing more and more companies choose to manage their contingent workforce themselves and outsource pieces of it to a third-party provider. Now getting into some of the data, which is really what Patrick wanted me to talk a little bit about. In our landscape report, this is the first page. Our most recent version is 2013. Our 2014 version is in production right now. So that should be coming out soon. And these are a listing of all the companies that we've recognized as participating in the report. The ones in yellow are the ones who participated. It's a very rigorous process. It takes some companies as long as several weeks to complete. And then what we do is after we get the spend threshold, we have detailed calls with each of them to validate the findings, look at the numbers, and confirm the data that they've provided us. So overwhelmingly, when we look at combined VMS MSP, I don't know why the numbers didn't show up, it's about $100 billion in spend in 2012. VMS is much larger, as you see, because some companies don't participate in the study. But VMS, some MSPs chose not to participate, but VMS also has a tremendous amount of companies who manage it themselves on top of their own technology with their own program offices. But we've seen tremendous growth in VMS. Year over year, it's trending at about 21%. We're going to talk a little bit about that in another slide. But this growth seems to not be slowing at all, but we do see some leveling off in some markets. In the US, we see penetration really coming down, going from 25% growth down to 10% growth year over year. So we think we're reaching some sort of a plateau with adoption amongst large companies. There are some larger implementations coming in online right now that might sincerely skew that number, but that growth is really becoming slower in penetration. But about 75% of global countries have these sort of technologies in place. Okay, so you can see it's growing at around 20% annually. MSP is growing around 19 or 18%. This is 2011 to 2012. So 2013, what we do when we look at this is everything is a year back. So 2014 is going to look at 2013 numbers. What we see a lot of is SOW. In the Netherlands, we don't see as much of that here, the usual sort of problems that we see. But as far as abroad, we see tremendous growth in statement of work management. Companies using milestone-based workers. Is everyone familiar with what the different types of labor categories are? Agency workers are workers who are supplied by an agency. We call them TAW. Other temps are other sorts of engagement models. And then statement of work management or statement of work is simply those engagements that have a defined timeline and a defined deliverable. That's really the big growth as we see in the States for how companies are choosing to do it, and it's an incredibly complex process. And how they choose to engage varies by company and by sophistication, excuse me. And this is the growth in the different sorts of strategies abroad. Total VMS growing at that rate, 21% globally. Outside of the US, it's 21%. Within the US, 23%. And within total own MSP, meaning VMS companies who also have their own technologies, it's 3% or 2%. And we see this tremendous growth of internally managed programs in the States, 45% year over year. So that speaks to the sophistication of contingent workforce managers, and how they're becoming more strategic in how they choose to manage the environment and how they choose to do it themselves instead of engaging third parties. Doesn't mean there's not a role for MSPs to play, but we certainly see that make versus buy becoming a very sincere decision for a lot of companies. And this speaks to the growth of internally managed programs again. Don't need to belabor the point. But it's certainly something that's a very significant trend. I mean, major companies are doing that. And that could be in some small part because of the types of labor. What we see in this chart, and I'm going to try and explain it, you might not see it with the light, but this speaks to the penetration of these solutions or programs based on the type of labor procured. The green line is traditional temp and contract, the red is statement of work, and the blue is outsource. So if we look across all these different countries, in the US, still temp and contract primarily. And then when we look at a company like Japan, it's almost all statement of work. We compare that to the Netherlands right here, you'll see most of what these programs engage is going to be temp and contract. Doesn't mean that this is not certainly a realm of consideration, but current solutions are not addressing some of the complexities in the marketplace. So there's still a lot of growth in project-based work for MSP and VMS. And how you choose to engage that is not going to look the same way. Most often when somebody engages a technology to manage a statement of work, it's simply to manage the tactical component of it. Onboarding, offboarding, maybe bill paying. Not a strategic solution where you source a position from ideation to execution to offboarding, like you would see with other categories of work. Most of statement of work management is just simply tactical in nature. So it's kind of a misnomer to think that you're far behind if you're not engaging it in that manner. Okay? By geography, still, the US very much has a mature application, but there's a lot of growth outside of the US when we think in the size of the market. These solutions have not quite yet taken hold in a lot of ways, and so we see a tremendous amount of growth for these solutions in the future, and how you choose to do that. I also think that Europe is farther along in the evolution than the States in a lot of ways. And I really do believe that. And the reason why I think that's the case is because in the States, all of these programs evolved to save money. Nothing wrong with saving money. I made my life doing that, right? I was procurement 16 years. Don't blame me. Don't hate me. Don't stab me in the back when I turn around. But at the end of the day, cost savings is not sustainable. A program based on cost savings is a program based on sugar water. It tastes good going in, but you can't live off of it, right? In Europe, most of the programs are based off of more tangible, sustainable value propositions. Talent quality, visibility, risk management, competitive access to talent. And that's why I think the European model is actually where a lot of US companies are heading in a painful, agonizing way. Because they build these programs, they staff these programs, they construct these programs to save money. They're lean, mean, and they're staffed with people who are the shark that we saw in the front. But to be strategic, which is really what we all want to do, it's based off a different skill set. Saving money is great. Nothing wrong with it. But you're not going to build a global program that's sustainable for 10, 15 years based on saving money. As much as I like to think I do. But in the Netherlands, you have a very different market. When we look at the market, unfortunately this is in dollars, but don't blame me. Still, tremendous component of your environment, of $112 billion, is independent contractors, which is no surprise to anybody, right? But when we look at what we consider agency temps, it's $12 billion in our estimate. So the amount of complexity required to manage this pales in comparison to the complexities of managing these environments. Other temporaries or other types of contingent labor, consultants, these sorts of things. So obviously these ZZ peers are where the future lies, and developing strategies on managing these folks are really critical, and that's a differentiator. So unified talent strategy, which is what we all talk about, total talent management, strategic workforce management, is going to be based on how you manage each of these discrete and unique components. When we think about these, the size of your market, the total VMS spend in the Netherlands is only $3 billion out of $112 billion. So amazing opportunities for these technologies and strategies to make a real impact in your market. If you think about the fact that over 100 billion of it is not even touched now with current solutions. I'm sure that makes Patrick very happy. No, the universe is out there for you. I think what also makes Patrick happy is we talk about the program count. So this is MSP program count, managed service providers from our study. We have a number of cuts that we look at the data. Spend under management is just one metric. It's a metric that I think is also misleading. Because while we think of complexity and scale based off of the size of your program, bigger doesn't always mean better. And so often I kind of resist showing these slides because people do lazy procurement, where they say, I'll just take the guy in the top, or the top 5. And really the idea is to identify your own unique solutions and use reports like ours to build a short list. But the total number of programs is very, very small, only about 160 MSP programs in the Netherlands in 2012. And this is Patrick's favorite slide here, I know. So this is VMS by program count. As you can see, no funding was made to present this slide. But the interesting fact is that in the Netherlands, only 144 VMS programs exist in totality, of any shape, size, color, or creed, in 2012. Now, with our numbers that we see in 2013, we're going to hopefully we'll see a significant increase in those numbers. But it's still tremendous, tremendous growth. So significant change in how you choose to do that. And with VMS comes the visibility to be able to build a strategic approach. But the differentiation, and one of the things that we feel sets us apart in how we do our report, is one of the the services differentiator. And this is where we look at the features of each individual VMS, and we compare them across a number of different verticals and capabilities. Each of those is green, obviously means it's something that they offer now. Yellow means don't currently offer, but in development. Yellow means offer through on the plan, and then red is obviously you don't offer at all. Each of these is validated. So as you can see, the functionalities that exist vary tremendously across individual companies. As you can see, the names up top have been hidden to protect the innocent. But the idea here is to be able to fully see the sophistication of the market, is to see this change. If we go back several years, this was mostly red. But the technology is getting more evolved, and the way that companies are demanding the solutions to evolve with them are getting more robust. An important consideration when you look at these technologies, if this is something you're considering, really be honest about what it is that you want. Don't get distracted by a cute chart. So often, these solutions are a victim of what's called the consumption gap, where you buy more than you're really going to need. So really look at the features and understand the differences so that you're really going to take advantage of them. A very well-known VMS a couple of years ago actually published a statistic that said that companies are only using 10% of their functionality. But they make a decision based off of the 90% that they don't use. So really be very, very clear about the features that are really going to be successful in your company when you look at these technologies, and when you expect the implementations to be changed or a lot of customization, be very, very clear with what you really think you're going to be using and how your company is going to engage that. This is a great chart, but so often a lot of this is meaningless making a decision to a large company because they're not going to use these things. So really make sure that you have a deep understanding of what your requirements are going to be. But what's next? What is next? So often, that's the number one question that people are asking. What's next? What's the next big thing? What should I be doing next? How do I engage? Hey, good to see you. Buyers are changing. We talk about traditional buyers, and now we see this evolution of the contingent workforce professional. A good example that I use when we talk about this is if I go back 8 years to our first conference, and we look at the titles of the people who participated in that session, it was buyer, HR generalist, category lead. Now, I think people in this room, or titles of people who attend the conference, are things like contingent workforce lead, external labor manager. It's becoming a discipline in and unto itself. And you have what that creates is a more proactive workforce, certainly a better supplier engagement strategy, where it's win-win as opposed to win-lose. It's more participatory in nature, and it has a longer vision window. And it's the beginning of what we think of this evolution towards strategic workforce management. And what that looks like at SIA is we've developed what we call a program maturity model. I'm not going to go into it in tremendous detail, but basically it architects and gives you a roadmap for how you decide what the next step for your company is. It's based off of, how'd that happen? It's based off of 5 levels and several dimensions. The idea being is that at some point when you reach maturity, a fully mature program is one that creates a competitive differentiation for your company. But a fact of life is that not every company is going to be able to make the journey from level 1 to level 5, because that's just not an interest. And until the time when your company really recognizes that, that's where you're going to stay. So if we think of this life cycle, some companies are perfectly happy staying at level 3. My culture is never going to see it in this manner. We're just going to go about and look at managing and containing costs, as opposed to a more proactive approach. Okay? And this is the evolution of the market as we see it. In the beginning, programs are decentralized. Procurement comes in, puts in preferred suppliers. Save money. And then we have master supplier. Maybe you negotiate and consolidate that down. And then we implement this managed service provider concept where somebody comes in and we have an organized program that does nothing but control this really crazy workforce of preferred suppliers that we put together and help me build holistic strategies. Then we see total talent management, which is an integrated approach to this ultimate kind of nirvana state where we say it's a real competitive advantage. And what that looks like is going to be different for every company. And that challenge is the existential challenge of the business. Is how do you go about creating a vision that differentiates and says talent is something that sets my company apart? What does that look like? How many people have sat in front of your CFO and they said, how much are we going to save? And until you came up with that number, nothing you said was important. He was looking at his BlackBerry, taking a phone call, but he just went to the back page of your presentation and saw the savings number. Because they don't buy, or a lot of times it's hard to articulate, this competitive vision. So really that's the challenge. But for each of you, as you go through building a strategy, you have to be able to go from the top down and the bottom up. Be able to say, how does labor make a difference in the life of my customer? How does labor and my access to labor create a different experience in my software, in the way that we get things done? And how is that going to be something that we can differentiate ourselves in the market? Microsoft, one of the executives at Microsoft during one of my panels had a very, very compelling quote that I used, and I love the way he said it. He said that at Microsoft, our strategy is to get the best people possible. We want to get the best engineers, the best software architects. We want to get the best that we can find. Why on earth would we limit the ways in which we engage them? And that's strategic workforce management. It's moving from an operational approach to a strategic approach. It's changing the focus of your window from being forecasting, being the whole process, to being just a part of the process, instead of an integrated approach to how you manage your labor and how you forecast labor. But at the same time, it's not a broad vision. If you talk about contingent workforce management or strategic workforce management, it's easy to get lost in the magnitude of what you can do, right? I mean, it's a pretty significant plan to say, I want to go ahead and tie me putting a temp in his seat, tying it to the fact that it's going to change our competitive position in the market. It doesn't need to be that way. It just needs to be a situation where you could maybe tie your program to the lease schedules on your server farm. You know your servers are going to come off lease. You know you're going to be replacing them. You know you're going to be needing workers around that time. That's strategic planning. Sounds simple, right? Or maybe you know you have a product launch. These are all things that you have a window into to be able to forecast your demand. And as you start to show that benefit, it creates a narrative that you can start to expand upwards. So think big and start small is kind of the message for that. Like I mentioned before, we see this explosive growth in VMS kind of tapering off. This is from our buyer survey that we do, and this is a global number, heavily skewed toward the US. But it shows an evolution curve that we see here. Obviously, in the Netherlands, as far as penetration, we're on this end of the spectrum. But this is the traditional adoption curve that we think we're going to see in the States. Same in MSP. Again, a traditional level off. Not a significant change. A lot of growth is coming organically. And again, a lot of the larger programs. So right now, a lot of the MSPs are finding that they have to build solutions for smaller offerings. Also, in the States, the vendor-neutral solution is sometimes more expensive for providers to deliver. They're more prevalent because the programs are usually larger. In the Netherlands, the average program size is about 15 million euro. In the States, it's 40. So if you think about a vendor-funded model, which is the primary mechanism these programs grow, they can support a vendor-neutral solution as opposed to the size and the scale that you have in the Netherlands, which are often relatively similar in how they deploy, but so the same cost structure can be supported. When we poll buyers, we find that there's a idea that legislation and regulation are going to continue to be an inhibitor to growth. They're expecting more legislation, more complexity, which leads to a greater need in more sophisticated buyers. And so when we look at what's next from our council members, one of the things that we do every year is we kind of ask all of them to say, what are you working on in 2015, 2014, and beyond? And this is what they tell us. So it's all over the map, right? Some say they want to save money. Some say they want to expand globally. Some say they want to go to simply implement an RFP. They want to change providers. But as you can see, these are some of the most sophisticated companies on the planet, and they're asking the same questions that everybody was asking last night, right? Everyone's asking the same sort of questions. Everyone's trying to figure out what this next step may be. One of the things that we see a tremendous growth in are some of this evolution of labor. Online staffing platforms like Elance and Odesk, and basically creating these talent environments, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, are really what I think is going to be a real disruptive model in the future. And if you think about the function of technology being an agent of disintermediation, getting rid of the middleman, being a fundamental truism about technology in general, you can see that over time, companies will be more comfortable engaging with the individual on a one-to-one basis. And that will really be a disruptive model. Crowdsourcing, work as a service, those sorts of things. And then, like I mentioned before, this is becoming a full-time profession. If we look at the evolution of contingent workforce management, 16% of it said it was something they spent more than 15% on. Thank you. I have a lot of time now. And then in 2008, 46, and now 60% and beyond. So it's becoming a much more sophisticated discipline. So this idea of what's next is going to be put forward by people like you and people like the people in the council to be able to redefine and create these solutions to create the next generation programs. And in the States, we have this educational curriculum for it called the CCWP to recognize, and it's a training program for contingent workforce managers, to be able to codify what we feel are best practices in the space. If you're interested, that's my only pitch. You can go. Come to Atlanta, but it's not. Or come to our Solution Summit in Vegas. Who doesn't want to come to Vegas? I don't, but still. So that's the end of the time. Again, the slides will be available for all of you. This is question time. So anybody have any questions now? I'll stand up here for 10 minutes.
Well, I do. Woo, sorry.
I'll get that. I'll step back over here.
I do have a question, though. What is really the big difference between leadership in America compared to leadership in Holland, then, when you want to reach what you've been reached already in the States?
Well, I think leadership in the States versus leadership in Holland is certainly focused on a shorter time frame. There is a reliance on cost savings. I talked about that before. But there's a bias towards execution that things get done faster, but doesn't mean it always gets done better.
No.
And there's still a fundamental struggle for legitimacy across most enterprises in recognizing that contingent workforce management is something to pay attention to. So that is the challenge that I see across buyers and suppliers, is to get legitimacy with senior executives, that this is something that needs to be addressed and something that could be a real competitive advantage.
But what do you think we need to do more then?
I think that the creative value proposition, what you really need is you need to be able to have a vision about, a compelling vision for change. And being able to find and publicize and evangelize companies who are doing it successfully, and then emulate those elements that make sense for you. And then also recognizing that this could be a real source of value for your organization. Doing things differently, I think that leveraging technology to the greatest extent possible, being focused on real value creation, which I wish I would have had the slide, but there's an evolution of a program is cost savings versus demand management versus value creation. And that the highest level of a sourcing is value creation. And in this realm, it's challenging to be able to do that. So it's easy to focus on the lower level quick benefits. Being able to build a long-term vision is going to be about creating value for your company, and that's going to be different for everybody. Mm-hmm. The easiest example, like I mentioned, is Microsoft, where their feel that talent is a differentiator. It's harder to say that for other companies. Maybe in healthcare, it's access to nurses. Maybe in automotive, it's engineers. It's going to be different for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Stand up, tell him your name and your company.
I'm Jeroen Sekkers from ZZP Barometer. We met last night, of course. I have a question on the research and the methodology. How do you calculate the market size for each country? Do you do desk research and check all annual reports of companies from the top 100, or do you extrapolate from the survey? Or
well, for this particular survey, the landscape survey, we poll and we validate. It's self-reported by all the providers, but their CFO signs off on the numbers they provide us. So for this particular report, what we do is we have the questionnaire, but there's a validation step that occurs in the data. And it's a very complex process to validate this particular report because of all the variables. It's very hard to lie because these guys are pretty good at spotting when people are kind of having consistencies. For our overall market estimates, we have a team of people who do that. I can't speak to their black box, but I do know that they've been doing it for a while, building these market estimates for a broader market size, like saying the market's $4 billion or $4 trillion. But it is a combination of sources, either from the federal government or the governments of these relevant nations, or things like SEAT, participating with SEAT, and those sorts of things.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Easy question. Come on.
Come on, guys. Some more questions. He flew all the way from America to you. Yes. On this
And don't
side.
ask me about Mexican Netherlands.
Well, my name is Geert Maas op Intelligence Group. You told us about the importance of the growingness of the statement of work.
Yes.
And you also told us about more strategic, looking for quality and the best talent.
Yes.
But are those two not conflicting? Because if you would like to buy innovative power, or if you
Sure.
want to buy leadership, you don't buy it with statement of works. You just buy simple
Absolutely.
parts.
No, yes and no. I think the idea is that statement of work is a mechanism for engagement, right? So if we agree that there are many ways that you can choose to hire somebody. You can hire an independent contractor, you can hire a freelancer online, you can hire them full time, you can source them to an agency, or you can have them on a statement of work. So the methods of engagement are getting more complex, right? So if we agree that these are all just simply mechanisms of engagement, then that creates a strategy. So part of your program, when we say strategic workforce management includes SOW, is like maybe a company like Dell, where they have an engine that the hiring manager is no longer tasked with deciding, I need a temp, or I need a project, or I need a full-time worker. The business rules establish where you're going to go. You outline the problem, you answer questions, and eventually a little box comes up and says, you're looking for a full-time hire, or this is a project. And then it takes you through that workflow. So SOW, statement of work, is just an engagement model that you can choose to engage or not, right? Some companies make a strategic choice to use more, like Cisco. Other companies choose less, like Microsoft. It's just a mechanism of engagement. Hey. I know you. How you doing?
Hi, I'm Ronald from Allegius. Bryan, you just mentioned the acquisition of SAP.
Yes.
They acquired Fieldglass. Do you expect more acquisitions in that range for the VMSs?
Absolutely. I know Patrick likes that too. Absolutely. I think that the valuations are as high as they've been. This is a very dynamic space with acquisitions occurring all the time. I think that it's no secret that there are some very large providers that we all know that we can't name that are going to be divesting and acquiring as we see right now. So absolutely we see that occurring. And not just in the VMS space, but in the MSP space as well. A lot of consolidation, a lot of acquisition will be taking place. Stay tuned. Subscribe to Daily News. Unfortunately, I can't say anything, but still. Thank you. Good to see you, Ronald. Anyone else?
Any questions maybe on this side? I got a mic too.
Uh-oh.
Patrick, ik kom naar je toe. Alsjeblieft.
We have about already now 130 implementations.
Yes.
But when I go to every company, we have the same question. Who has the ownership, HR or procurement? How do we tackle that?
Can I have another hour? I have a very strong opinion on this, and I say this as somebody who was in procurement for 16 years. if we look at each of these steps, and everybody can take a look at your own programs, and you're someplace in this paradigm, from decentralized to not. Procurement does some things very well. So we're very good at bringing order to chaos, or chaos to order, depending on your opinion. Order out of chaos. And that's why if we think of order out of chaos, building structures, building processes, saving money, writing contracts, that is the world of moving from decentralized to preferred. That's procurement should be managing it. Putting a master vendor strategy in place, that's procurement managing it. Putting an MSP program in place, you're still managing a provider. You're managing a provider strategy, an engagement strategy. They're an engine of change that it needs to be managed. So that's a procurement function with participation of HR. Where we see, and I see this clear as day with companies that are doing innovative things with contingent workforce, universally moving talent management, where some companies are making contingent workforce as a strategic advantage, it's HR. So it depends on where you are in the life cycle. I think that HR has a greater stake in creating a talent-based vision. It's not the role of procurement to be able to do that. It's not. And again, I can say that, and I've been tarred and feathered by some procurement people because they disagree. But most programs that really are doing innovative things with an integrated talent approach that looks at full-time hires and contingents, it's going to be an HR function. But, like I said before, we see this evolution of the contingent workforce manager as being a role unto itself. It's not HR, it's not procurement, it's both. Maybe they serve two masters, maybe they report up to operations, but it's not just procurement, it's not just HR, it's this new hybrid. But I do think that HR is going to take a greater role in managing these programs in the future. Another question? Yes?
Ik heb een mic voor you. Dan kan iedereen je horen.
Nog beter.
Alsjeblieft.
My name is Inge Bot from Humanetics Business Consultancy. I have a question when I look to the right side of your slide.
Okay.
I totally agree. We are moving towards integrated talent management.
Sure.
How fast will software follows? Because we can manage the vendors, we can manage the contingent staff, and with totally different software, we have to manage the normal people who work for us.
Yes.
I see with my customers there is a need to integrate those systems.
Yes, absolutely.
And I see integration in ERP systems, but I don't see the integration in the HR system yet.
Yes. You're absolutely right. If we go back to 7, 8, 9, 10 years, a lot of the companies who were dipping their toe into VMS also were ATS systems, right? Applicant tracking systems. That didn't get a lot of market traction. So now we saw best of breed companies who are VMSs focusing only on VMS technologies, or ATS focusing only on ATS. Now with this creation of total talent management being something that people are at least talking about, you can argue how sophisticated companies are moving towards that. This software and the access to be able to have software that presents a consolidated vision is very limiting. Really, there's only one provider who has an ATS and VMS in a unified platform. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be others entering the space. But it certainly is a limiting factor, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But there's still ways to be strategic independent of that. Middleware, those sort of things. And we see that, that just because the software is out there doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means there's more pieces, yeah. A little bit more work, indeed. Indeed. But great question, thank you. That's almost a plant, I like that question. Yes?
One more. That's the mic.
Hi, Marco Rijko from Yacht. The implementation of VMS and ATS gives a really feeling of control and security. It gives more insight and figures. What I see in the Netherlands is that it's also becoming a leverage from just all the control and procurement to a lot more business perspective.
Yes.
Whereas we get a lot of more networking, more independent contractors.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is a lot of those deals get already confirmed in the business.
Yes.
And get as named resources or named candidates into the VMS system, and then gives the feeling of security and control.
Yes.
With the world becoming more and more network, LinkedIn, etc., that might be very contradictory to the feeling of control, cost savings, etc.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you recognize that around the globe, or is it just something I recognize in the Netherlands?
all over the world, we call that directed requisitions, right? Where they have pre-identified candidates, they come aboard. Every business is going to have a very different strategy for how they deal with that. If I have a business rule that contains every sort of engagement, right? So we establish a thin layer of policy, and they come in through an approved channel. Maybe that's an approved, maybe that's something that's okay with you. It's going to happen no matter what. With any of the companies I work with, you're hard pressed to find one that has 0 in that line. And any program that you have that has compliance over 80%, you are a rock star. So there's always going to be that 20% bleed. Having a policy that accepts that as a reality and provides flexibility while deciding on what policy you want them to engage. If you're going to engage independent contractors, and you're going to have to, especially in the Netherlands, how can you not? You need to be able to engage partners to be able to help you manage that population and have a strategy for how they come aboard. Maybe it's something where you say, yes, we can hire independent contractors, but there has to be a process where maybe you compare the role to a market event over a certain range, or maybe you have them have a minimum level of insurance or validation of skills. But it's establishment of a policy for how to handle those encourages adoption. Because when you're looking at these technologies, you're looking at these solutions, you can put controls in place. And if it's too rigorous, no one's going to use it. And you just spent all this time and money, and you don't get the customers. Because at the end of the day, we're all salesmen, right? We're all salesmen. You can implement a program, and if no one uses it, you failed. If you don't have adoption, you failed. So every decision that you're making for your company is going to have to be based on a fundamental premise of what's going to maximize adoption. If at your company, engaging independent contractors is something that we do as an organization, then you have to recognize that as a reality and build a system to accept that reality with a vision of moving the organization to wherever you want to go. But you're not going to be able to do that if everyone's going to be fighting and having what I call malicious compliance, right? So recognizing that as a reality and engaging companies to help you with doing that is really how you address it, because it's a problem anywhere you go. Anywhere you go.
I think these are really marvelous and great words to end with. But if there is another question, we can. One more, the last one. We'll give you the mic and just hop around. That's a young one. young talent.
Thank you. Niels Huismans, Fast Flex. I was very curious about your estimate of the percentage of companies who is already working with the last 2 steps of your slide. With the total management and workforce.
Very few. I would say that companies are at the front end of implementing an integrated solution, but I can only think of maybe 5 out of the thousands that I know that really have a program office that manages full-time hires and contingents in a unified strategy. One of them is Qualcomm, and they have a program that everyone, the full-time hiring and the recruiting and the RPO and MSP are all in one umbrella, and they manage that in a very integrated way because they have a very dynamic workforce, right? I mean, they're doing chip design for mobile phones, which, my phone's outdated. I bought it a month ago. So it's moving very, very quickly. So it's still a very nascent sort of an immature market. So it's a very small percentage. Very, very small. So it's something we talk about, but it's hard to define. Good question, though.
Thank you so much. I should say, give him a warm applause for his presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.